Okay, so today we're going to talk about the scientific method. It's experimental design. You guys have been learning about the scientific method forever, so this is just going to be a review for you. So you want to take out your notes, and we're going to get started. This is just a graphic showing you that the scientific method can pull you in a lot of different directions. It can have you ask a question, and then you can make a hypothesis. Here, you can test your hypothesis here and then analyze your data. That can have you draw a conclusion. Um, it can lead to you communicating your results if it supported your hypothesis, and if not, then you can form another a hypothesis from there. So, what is the scientific method? It is a step-by-step way in which scientists answer questions. The first thing you have to do is you have to ask a question. Once you ask a question, you can research the topic. This can be by going to the internet. This can be by reading the back of a label, contacting representatives, research. It can go to experts. There's a lot of different ways that you can research, and you will be doing many different ways of researching in this class this year. You have to form a hypothesis, obviously, and there's a specific way that you write a hypothesis that we will be discussing. And then from there, you test or run your experiment. Next, you collect your data. So while you're running your experiment, you're gathering your data, and then you have to analyze that data, and you do that by coming up with your results. Then you draw conclusions, and you have to communicate your results. So let's go into detail about stating the problem and how you ask the question. The problem identifies what you want to find out. So you have to develop a clear statement that's going to define your problem. You need to make sure that your problem is narrow and specific enough that you can actually do something to try to solve it. You're going to state the problem in the form of a question. Now you do not have to fill in any of this information here. These are just two different ways to show you how you can actually write the problem. How does blank affect blank, and what is the effect of blank on blank? And those are your two variables that you will be dealing with in those statements or questions. So now you have to research. You've come up with your problem. Now you have to actually research the problem. So you want to write down all the information that you already know. Again, then you can go to textbooks, you can use primary resource topic journals, and you can find research on the topic that you are investigating. Ask experts. For some stuff, I might be considered an expert. For some stuff, you might be considered an expert. If you find the answer to a problem that you want to investigate, then you don't need to do that. Obviously, we've already answered it. You need to pick something else. So now you have to come up with a hypothesis. And what exactly is your hypothesis? It's an explanation that's based on the prior scientific research or observations that can be tested. So you are making an educated guess. Your high school teacher's not going to like this definition. Hello. No, you need to write it in an if-then statement. So how do you test the hypothesis that you have written in an if-then statement? You're going to develop a test. This is the experiment that you're going to be doing. And you have to do this multiple times. You can't just do it one time and say that's it. You're going to do what's called repeated trials. And in class, what will happen is you will be working in groups a lot of the times, and your repeated trials will be done where you do your experiment and then your partners do their experiment, and that becomes your repeated trials. For science fair, it's obviously different. You have to do multiple repeated trials on your own. So obviously, you have to have one independent variable, which is the factor that's being tested. And you cannot have more than one independent variable, but you're going to have two different setups that you're going to do when you are doing an experiment. You have to have your experimental setup and you have to have your control setup. So what does that mean? Well, you're going to have a controlled experiment, and that's where you have only one factor at a time that is going to be changed. And by using a comparison of a control group and an experimental group, that is how you maintain a controlled experiment. So when you do an experiment, you're going to only change one thing, and then you have to leave that thing that you're changing the same to compare it to. So that is our control group. That's the group where the scientist changes absolutely nothing. The control group is your comparison. Then you have your experimental group. That's the group that the scientist has changed something, okay? And you are the scientist. You are going to be doing lots of labs, and you will be responsible for changing one thing. Many issues I've seen over the years with science fair, for instance, is that students wanted to change multiple variables. Okay, that's great that you want to change all these things and you want to look at things, but you have to have only one variable that you change. The group that the scientist has changed is your experimental group. That is the variable in the experiment where you want to see how the condition affects something. Okay, so story time. My daughter, when she was born early. And fun fact, she actually went into labor when I was teaching a group of sixth graders because she came early. So that was fun. Um, Anyway, she was born early, so she had a tendency to not sleep through the night. She was a fussy baby. So I decided I was going to change some things to see if I could get her to not be so fussy. And what I did was I just changed three things because I was exhausted. I was a tired mother. Not sleeping was just not cutting it for me. So what I did was I changed the way her bed was positioned. I put like a stuffed animal underneath her mattress. I changed the curtains that were in the room because there was a light outside of the window, a street light. And so I put the blackout curtains. And then I also started playing like classical music when she went to sleep because she has an older brother who wasn't going to bed at that time and the same time as her and that kind of thing. So the house was not super quiet. Okay, so I changed these three things. Well, yay for me, she started sleeping through the night. However, I had a very, very bad experiment because I don't know which of those three things caused her to sleep through the night. Now, was I about to actually stop and go back and say, okay, let's just try the mattress. Let's just try the curtains. Let's just try the music. No. I, to this day, don't know which of the three caused her to sleep through the night because I did a very poor experiment. So do not do that. Okay, so what is a variable? That's something that you're going to change. And it's in an experiment, it's a factor that's different from one group to another. So going back to my scenario of changing my daughter's room around, helping to try to help her sleep, I had three variables. That is a huge no-no. So you have an independent variable, and that's what the scientist is changing in order to test the hypothesis. So the independent variable, we like to call that IV. Okay, the independent variable is the factor that you change. So again, I said I changed three things in my lab, in my experiment with my daughter. I changed the bed, I changed the curtains, and I changed the music. So I had three independent variables. Again, big no-no. Then you have a dependent variable, and we call that DV. Okay, and that is the result of what the scientist changed. You have absolutely no control over this. So The independent variable is what you change. So independent, I change. IV, I change. Dependent variable, no control. It's what happens because you change something. And it is very important that you understand these two. Okay, so then you have constants. These are the things that the scientist is going to keep the same in both the control group and in the experimental group. So thinking back to my really bad scenario with me and my daughter, the things that I kept the same is that she had her same blanket, she had her same pacifier, she had her same bedtime, same sheets. Those are all the things that we kept the same. She had the same temperature of her room. I didn't change like the particular onesie that she was sleeping in or those kinds of things. So the things that you keep constant in your experiment are very important to document because you only want to change how many things? One thing. So everything else will be constant. Okay, so now that we know how to go through the steps of the scientific method, now we're going to talk about what you do once you've done your experiment. And what you have to do first is you have to make observations. You gather your data, you're going through your experiment and you are gathering the data. You make observations using your senses, and we do this two ways. One is qualitative. So that is see, smell, touch, taste, hear. So you can tell me that something is blue, something is bitter, it's fizzing, it's hot, it's cold. Those are all qualitative observations. Next, you have quantitative observations. Quantity, numbers. So any observation that you can actually measure is a quantitative observation. And that is going to be a number, and then generally you're going to have a unit somewhere. So we have to know what you're measuring it by. So 5 centimeters long is a quantitative observation. How can you analyze the results? You have to record the data, and the way you do that is you put it into a table or a chart. Okay, so we have to write down all of our observations and our measurements, and we have to be consistent when we are checking on our data. You are about to do an experiment where you're going to have to check on something every 5 minutes, and if you don't, your data is going to be off. So you have to be careful about that. And from that, once you've collected your data, you have to analyze the data in terms of putting it into graphs. We can make pie graphs, we can make line graphs, we can make bar graphs, pie charts, not pie graph. You're going to complete all the necessary mathematical calculations. You are going to have to do statistical analysis on these things. So now let's remind ourselves how we set up a graph. On your graph, you're going to have a y-axis, and this is your dependent variable. Okay, the y-axis is dependent. So on your paper, I want you to use a pen or a highlighter, something that shows that this right here is your y-axis. And the bottom part is your left x-axis. That is for your independent variable. And I have a way for you to remember this that's very, very simple. But before we get into that, let's talk about the things that have to be on every graph. And you have to be careful that you don't forget these things, because if you do, you're going to lose points on your graphing. And that is going to cause your lab grade to drop, and we don't want that to happen. Okay, so let's just look at this graph. This is a graph of teachers' favorite singers. And we had over 20 teachers that were polled. We have Beyonce, Luke Bryan, Drake, Taylor Swift, and Justin Bieber. All right, so the first thing you have to do is you have to label your bars and you date it. Well, first thing you have to do is you have to have a title. So you want to remember the phrase TAILS, the acronym. TAILS stands for title, axis, interval, labels, and scale. So the title is teacher's favorite singer. The axis is, let's see, we have our x-axis is singers and our y-axis is number of teachers. The interval that we have is 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. Okay, our labels are here. We've got our labels. We've got these labels. Um, Give these bars a general label. So maybe you live under a rock and you don't know who Beyonce is. You don't know who Luke Bryan is. You don't know who any of these people are. We know that they're singers. So we have to make sure that we include a title, a label for that. Um, Label your bars or your data points so that we know what this represents. This could be centimeters, it could be time, but for this instance, it's number of teachers. And you want to make sure that we have a scale to tell us, since there's no scale written up here, we can assume that 0 equals, 5 equals actually 5 teachers. Otherwise, maybe 5 stands for 500, and that would be probably in parentheses over here or annotated down at the bottom. Okay, so to remember how to place your X and Y axis with which variable, just remember dry mix. Dry stands for the dependent variable, which we also call the responding variable sometimes, and that is the y-axis. It's a responding variable because it is in response to something that you do. If you say something about a person, they're going to respond to you. So you can't control what they do. Also, you have the manipulating, which is also the independent, or the X, and that goes on the X-axis. So manipulating and responding are just two different terms that relate to IV, which is independent variable, and DV, which is dependent variable. Okay, so for our conclusions, we want to make sure that we tell whether our prediction was accepted or rejected. And then we're going to use the recall format to write our conclusion. Now, you know what the recall format is because you have seen the paperwork. You received it the first day of class. Okay, so we're going to be using models in class, and the models that we use in class are usually candy, so yay. But we use a model to represent an object or a system. And I know you guys have all done this. You've done the model with the volcano and then the model where you did the solar system. All right, so last thing we're going to discuss is the difference between a theory and a law. A theory is an explanation that's going to tie together many hypotheses and observations. It's supported by repeated trials, and it's going to help you with further predictions. So here's what's important about a theory. It tells you why something happens. On the other hand, a law is just a summary of many experimental results, and it tells you how things work, and it tells you what happens. It doesn't tell you why it happens, it tells you what happens, and it tells you how it happens. So there is a difference between. Okay, so this is just a graphic for you to show you that a law is made up of facts, and theories are made up of hypotheses and testable explanations.